but welcome on this beautiful crisp morning, and thank you for being here and joining us today. I have to tell you that I appreciate all the support of the advocates and survivors who are standing behind me and beside me as we've been tirelessly fighting for years to end human trafficking. Most of them behind me have been fighting longer than before I even ever got up here to be elected to office. We know that last year's passage of SB 14 would be an extraordinary lift, but the effort led by the incredible brave survivors and with God's favor and all of you in the media who really exposed what was going on in the Public Safety Committee, it got over hundreds of thousands of Californians involved to participate in this process and to make human trafficking, the selling of a minor child in the state of California, a serious felony. And that was just extraordinary, and I want you to know we couldn't have done it without all of you standing in front of me. Now, thanks to SB 14, anyone who traffics a minor child for sex is considered a serious felony. It's a strikeable offense, and we're excited that we were able to elevate that to that level in the state of California. The good news is that we've received notices from district attorneys across the state where individuals are being busted for human trafficking, and we gave them a tool in their toolbox so that they could put these individuals in prison, specifically if for a longer period of time if they were a repeat offender. The passage of SB 14 was a historic step in the right direction. But after meeting with our survivors and our lived experienced experts, we realized that there are two people that it takes to perpetrate this crime. The seller, which we addressed last year, and the buyer, which we are addressing today in public safety with SB 1414. Children as young as 14 years old are being exploited and victimized in this industry, and they're forced to unimaginable horrors. And let's be clear, there is no such thing as child prostitution. It doesn't exist in the state of California. It is illegal to be a child prostitute. A child cannot consent to selling her body and make it legal. You have to be 18 to buy a lottery ticket, and this bill is going to protect children who are exploited in this arena, under 18 years old. This particular bill that we have today is making sure that SB 1414 that states that anyone legally, and Tyson will come up here and explain it more in detail, anyone who solicits or engages in solicitation of a minor child for commercial sex will face a felony. Today, that's a misdemeanor. Don't be shocked. I was shocked, but it is a misdemeanor to engage in solicitation or solicit a minor for sex. We want them to be felony charges. We want them to be registered as a sex offender. And I'm telling you that I'm just not talking about just that piece. I want them to pay a $25,000 fine so that those resources can go to the individuals and the organizations behind me and others like them around the state to help rescue and deal with the trauma that these individuals suffer at the hands of these perpetrators. We all have to shed a light on the darkness of human trafficking, and we have to bring justice and protection to those that are affected. California is a hotbed for human trafficking, and with the passage of SB 1414, we want to send a very clear message that not one more child will be sold or suffer at the hands of those that seek to exploit our children. Together, we can stand up and make sure that these children in California are protected. I'm honored to introduce my joint author today, Senator Susan Rubio. She's an incredible domestic violence survivor. She's a victim's advocate. She stood with me in the support of SB 14 last year, side by side with the ups and downs, and she's been a champion for children in this state. Please welcome Senator Rubio.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so honored to be here this morning to join this incredible woman who has also stood by me as we tackle the very serious issues facing California as it pertains to victims, children being harmed, women. We need to stop the violence in our state, but in particular today we're here to tackle our children, our most vulnerable residents of California. And we did take on that fight, SB 14, last year, but I think that it takes a little bit of education to understand what our victims are going through, and it is time that we deal with this issue head on. So last year, SB 14 took on the people that are selling our children for sex. This time, we're trying to tackle those that are buying our children for sex. That is unacceptable. Our children are too young to consent, and they're forced into horrific circumstances. California is leading the way in human trafficking. We want to be leaders, but not on human trafficking. We need to stand firm. We need to send a loud message to everyone in the state that we will protect children at all costs. So today I'm really thankful once again to join our leader here, wonderful Senator Grove, who has taken on this issue. Like myself, she's also a victim's advocate, fights really hard on very difficult issues. I've been there. Our bills tend to run into opposition because there are difficult topics to face. We don't want to talk about these issues that are so, they're difficult. They're difficult on the heart. They're difficult on our state, but it's time that we deal with this. I was talking to someone who shared with me that in the last few months, there were more than 500 arrests statewide on anti-human trafficking operations. What we're dealing with is human trafficking. I know that some people like to believe that these are consensual relationships where one person consented, but as already stated by my joint author, a child cannot consent. And if we keep sending that message that a child could consent, then we are only encouraging our children to remain silent when things happen to them. They feel like they did something wrong. They feel like they're to blame, and we need to share with them that we're here to listen, we're here to protect them, and we will continue to fight alongside them so that not only are they protected, but there's penalties for those that are harming our children. So once again, I want to thank the great Senator, Shannon Grove, for continuing to push the envelope on this issue. And I also want to just commend all those in the media. Last year, we did run into some opposition, and we need to shine a bright spotlight on this issue, and I think collectively California did that. California came coming to the rescue with the phone calls, with letters, showing up in person, calling their legislators. This is how collectively we make a difference. This is how collectively we save our children. And we're standing here with survivors that can tell you themselves that they did not have a choice. They don't have a choice. And we keep saying that a child can consent. That is wrong. They cannot consent. They cannot buy alcohol at 21 and under. How can you consent to sex when you're a child, when you don't know any better? So again, we're going after perpetrators that sold children with SB 14. Now we have to tackle the other side, because if we have a market for buying our children, it will never end. So now we need to make sure that those that are buying children, paying for sex, coercing our children, also get the message that you're part of the problem and we need you to stop. And if you don't stop, we're coming after you. So once again, thank you. Thank you. I just want to say to all the survivors behind us, I am a survivor of domestic violence, so I know how difficult it is to put your life out there. It is so difficult to acknowledge what you're feeling and put your feelings out there. So I know that it takes tremendous courage for the survivors to stand behind me and come and tell their stories. I know it takes a lot of courage to have to relive. Every time you tell a story, you're reliving the horrific circumstance that you were put in. So thank you to all the victims behind us, because we want to tell you today that we're standing beside you. We're not letting go of this issue. We will fight for you, and we will make sure that nobody harms our children. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Rubio. Next is our co-sponsor of the measure that we needed for somebody to stand with us and wholeheartedly embrace this. Our co-sponsor, Vanessa Russell, is the founder and executive director of Love Never Fails. It's an organization based in the Bay Area, and it fights every day to end the horrendous crimes and practices of human trafficking and protects survivors of this terrible crime. So, Vanessa?
Thank you so much. As was mentioned, my name is Vanessa Russell. I'm the founding executive director of Love Never Fails. We are a national anti-trafficking organization that has been in place for the last 13 years. And we started when one of my 15-year-old dance students was raped in the city of Hayward and sold throughout California for a year. I should mention, I'm also the cybersecurity professor for Merritt College in the heart of Oakland, where we specialize in providing economic sustainable skills for survivors of human trafficking and other underserved community members. Human trafficking is rooted in slavery. It's targeting the most vulnerable people in our society for the sexual gratification of the most powerful. These vulnerable members of our society are children, often children that are in foster care, living in poverty, children like 15-year-old Elena, whose mother was murdered in the life and was coerced to believe that she was continuing her legacy by continuing to be trafficked in her mother's footsteps. Children like 16-year-old Tanisha, who thought her exploiter loved her until she said she didn't want to do it anymore, and she was pistol whipped and put out on East 15th anyway, and even though she had a closed eye and bruised arms, was still forced by buyers to have sex one after one after one. Did you know that buying these children is just a misdemeanor today, punishable by 2 days in prison, and oftentimes those are not even being served? I was so grateful when I heard that Senator Grove and Rubio were standing up with SB 1414 to address this injustice, making this crime a felony, and shocked to hear there was pushback. The reason given by those that are pushing back is that a belief that 16 and 17-year-olds should be excluded from protections because they are voluntarily entering into the sex industry and need a means to provide for themselves. If 16 and 17-year-olds need financial means to survive, why are we relinquishing them to having sex with strangers in the dark in back alleys instead of training them for economically sustainable careers and safe jobs? Being raped at 16 by 9 to 21 people a day is not a summer internship. It is not an empowering work experience, and certainly isn't a way to provide for oneself, since the money earned for their rape is being kept by their exploiter. In California, it is a felony to rape a child. Penal Code 261 states that raping a child under 14 is punishable by 9 to 14 years, and raping a child 14 to 18 is punishable by 7 to 11 years in prison. Why are children who are being sold multiple times a day not worth the same convictions and protections? A 2006 research project revealed that 99% of buyers are men, 86% are 26 and older, 42% earn more than $50,000 a year, 29% graduated from college, 69% are employed, and 49% are married. Explain to me why we are working so hard to protect educated, affluent, and people who know better, who know this is wrong, and not working hard enough to protect innocent children. Thank you for supporting SB 1414.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. She'll be sitting with us in committee. Our next speaker, a co-sponsor of SB 1414, is Ashley Bryant, co-founder and president and CEO of Strands Global Foundation. She was the one who was our co-sponsor and our sponsor of our bill SB 14 last year. And if you don't know, she not only is very active in this community, she actually opened the organization called The Table just a few blocks from here, where women that are on the street that are susceptible to some of this activity, specifically under survival sex, so that they are not forced, because they consent to survival sex so people don't steal their belongings when they're homeless. That's another issue that needs to be addressed. But when you look at what she's doing with The Table, they have a place to come and do their laundry and get a hot meal and be counseled, mentored, and have the ability to fill out a resume and get wraparound services. So this is an incredible human being coming to the microphone right now that actually stands up and defends. All of these ladies are behind me and these gentlemen, but she is just going out of her way to make sure that she protects girls and women right here in Sacramento on the streets. Ashley.
Thank you, Senator Grove. Good morning. Last year we stood here announcing SB 14, the groundbreaking legislation that got the attention and support of people across the entire state of California. Individuals stood behind SB 14, a bill that made child trafficking a serious felony. It was unanimously passed by California lawmakers and ultimately signed into law by the governor. SB 14 paved the way for us today. And SB 1414, by recognizing the dire need to not only hold traffickers accountable, but also buyers accountable for their participation in buying our children and fueling the demand of human trafficking. Three Strands Global Foundation is honored to co-sponsor SB 1414, which stipulates that if a buyer solicits a minor, irrespective of whether they knew or reasonably should have known the person they solicited was a minor, they will face severe consequences. Specifically, the offense is punishable by a prison sentence and has a fine of $25,000. I had the opportunity to interview several convicted sex traffickers from the confines of prison. The feedback I received when I was asked what is the best way to deter buyers from participating in human trafficking, it was consistent. The response I heard over and over again was that if a fine was imposed for trafficking, it would be the biggest deterrent to stop would-be buyers from taking action. SB 1414, in SB 1414, the penalty not only involves prison time, but a significant fine. Why is SB 1414 so important? Human trafficking is a crime that preys on the most vulnerable among us, robbing individuals of their freedom, dignity, and basic human rights. Minors in particular are often targeted due to their vulnerability, making them easy prey for traffickers. By enacting SB 1414, California is sending a clear message. We will not tolerate individuals buying our children. We will hold buyers accountable for their crimes and ensure that justice is served for the victims. This legislation serves as a beacon of hope for victims and survivors, reaffirming our commitment to protecting the most vulnerable members of our society. Our Three Strands Global Foundation Survivor Advisory Board has made it clear that those who purchase sex have a role in exploitation and harm of victims. It is necessary to hold buyers responsible if we want to end human trafficking in California. SB 1414 is the next significant milestone in our ongoing efforts to combat human trafficking and protect our children in the great state of California. I urge each of you to contact your local legislators and share your support for this vital legislation. Join us in our fight against this abhorrent crime. Together we can make a difference, create a safer and more just society for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Next, I would like to bring up a survivor and a lived experience expert, Sandy Esparza, who is also a human trafficking prevention manager, program manager with Zoe International, who participated in last year's bill as well. She's here to share her firsthand experiences of surviving this heinous crime.
Thank you, Senator Grove. Good morning. My name is Sandy Esparza. I'm a survivor leader and advocate working directly with child victims of sex trafficking in California. I see and hear their stories of abuse and rape day to day, and I also know firsthand the damage that buyers cause. I was first sold to men and purchased for sex at the age of 14 in my own backyard and community of South Central Los Angeles. That continued through my teen years, and at no point did I choose it. At no point did I want to be there. And at no point was any sex buyer held accountable for the crimes committed against me. Today, the teen victims ages 14 to 17 that I work with are purchased for sex in the same city and surrounding communities, often on the same streets and same motels that I was abused in so many years ago. Currently, sex buyers rape children and walk away with a slap on the wrist in California, if they are even caught and arrested. But the child, the victim, the hundreds of children being bought and sold throughout the state, they walk away with physical and emotional trauma that they live with for the rest of their lives. For me, that meant depression, complex PTSD, multiple suicide attempts, a cervical cancer diagnosis, and a number of other challenges I face as a survivor. What is the message that we are sending our children about their worth and value? When does it end? Sex buyers don't just rape children, they rob them of their childhood, their dreams, their dignity, their worth, and their value. Today, I work with child victims who struggle to just live another day. They're afraid of going to bed at night to face the torment of night terrors that await them as their bodies and minds keep score of the crimes committed against them. Are our children not worth protecting and fighting for? Of course they are. So I ask you, I plead with you today, would you consider the reality of a child that is bought for sex repeatedly? We need a punishment that fits the crime. And to be clear, this is a crime against a child. It breaks my heart as a survivor to hear that in 26 years since I was first purchased for sex as a teenager, buyers have successfully continued to abuse and rape children in California because no one is holding them accountable. Nothing has changed, which tells us that something has to change. The laws didn't protect me then, and they aren't protecting children now. That's why, as a survivor and overcomer of child sex trafficking, who now works with hundreds of child and teen victims, I support SB 1414 and urge you to do the same and do your part in giving our children the justice and protection they deserve. Thank you.
I wish there was a way to do this bill without hearing those horrific stories, because even though I've heard them before, it still just hits me like a ton of bricks. Next, I want to invite Brianna Williams, who's not only a survivor of sex trafficking, but more importantly, she's an inspirational entrepreneur and the owner of Katrina's Popcorn, where she uses her position to employ those and support her fellow survivors, teaching them about banking and accountability and purchasing so that they can be successful in their afterlife of going through the trauma that they've been. Please welcome Brianna.
Hi, my name is Brianna Mosley. My childhood and innocence was stolen because I was being sold time and time again, day after day. And each day I woke up and it was like yesterday, pure misery. I didn't get to walk across the stage. I didn't get to go to prom or any dance for that matter, to go to the mall with my friends or skating or anything that a teenager should get to do. Instead, I was being sold and treated like I was less than human, like I was a commodity, and as if I wasn't a child. But the thing is, in order to sell something, there has to be a buyer. During the time I was being trafficked, there's two encounters I'm going to share with you. The first one was when I was 16 years old, and I was being bought by a buyer, and he asked me if I had any younger friends. At that time, I told him I'm 16, and he said, no. Do you have any that are like 12? I told him I didn't, and so he proceeded to purchase me as if I was a commodity and had me pretend to be a 12-year-old. The second encounter was when my mom, she searched for me tirelessly. I was featured on news stations all across America and featured on missing and exploited children. At one point, there was flyers that were posted right down the street from where I was being sold. And on several occasions, I would have buyers come to me and say, hey, did you see your picture, your flyer down the street? And I would say, no, I didn't. And then they would proceed to purchase me. The thing is, the flyer says a few different things. It said my name, it said how old I was, and it also said that I was missing. It also said, if you see her, to call the police, and they did not. You may think, well, what if they didn't know? What if they don't know how old they are? But think about this. Think about your 10-year-old, your 14-year-old, your 16-year-olds. What if somebody raped them time and time again? And then when they were done, they said, oh, sorry, I didn't know. I didn't know they were a minor. But because they threw money at them, that made it all better? No, it doesn't. No child deserves to be sold. And in order to sell something, you have to have a buyer. I support SB 1414. Thank you.
Our next survivor is Jenna McKay, who is also a fierce advocate of human trafficking survivors, and she's dedicated her life and her story to inspire others and educate and train them. Jenna.
18 years ago, I was headed to play college volleyball, and then I was lured out of my private school in Southern California and trafficked right there in my community. While my trafficker was the one that set up these traumatic events to happen, it was the buyers who were the most violent and caused the most long-term damage. To this day, I'm still in therapy every week for my complex PTSD, and I need extensive health care to my back, a result of the last time that I was sold, raped, and beaten. I share that with you to share the long-term healing journey that a victim has to survive because of being bought. None of my buyers or rapists were ever held accountable. We have the responsibility to do right for the victims that it's happening to now. At no point ever is a trafficking victim choosing or has a choice. I encourage those that think so to educate themselves on trafficking and force, fraud, and coercion. Please do the right thing and pass SB 1414.
Thank you, Jenna. I'm incredibly honored to invite Dr. Stephanie Powell. Dr. Powell is a retired police sergeant who spent 30 years with the Los Angeles Police Department. She's the founder and chief educator at Powell and Positive Change and a senior advisor to the NCOSC's Institute for Public Policy. And she flew up here from San Diego this morning to not miss this historic hinge event that's going to take place today in this committee. Los Angeles. I apologize, Los Angeles.
Good morning. Before I even get started, I can't believe that there's anybody out here that's not angry. I can't even believe that there's even opposition. It just doesn't make sense to me. But I'm going to get started with my prepared speech. Good morning. My name is Dr. Stephanie Powell, and as you heard, I'm a retired police sergeant. I ran a vice unit in the Los Angeles Police Department. I am also a victim's advocate. I have witnessed the consequences of human trafficking. I have witnessed sex buyers solicit and agree to engage in commercial sex acts. Trafficking victims have said, as you have heard, the buyers knew how old they were and didn't care, and oftentimes stated the younger the better, until I would arrest them, and then they would say, I didn't know she was 15, and get away with it. Senator Grove's bill will strengthen the protection of the vast numbers of minors that have been exploited. This bill will send a message to sex buyers because without them, no sales can be made. A buyer sees the body of the exploited as a commodity. The idea that a 16 or 17-year-old should be excluded from this bill is ludicrous. Those same minors can't legally buy alcohol, but yet they should be allowed to be sold, and the consequences a misdemeanor? The mere thought of that goes against everything that I have personally fought for. For the buyers, I say to you, your time is over. The time is now, and without buyers, there are no sales. Thank you.
Our next speaker, thank you, Dr. Powell, but our next speaker is a civil rights advocate who spent 13 years in the foster care system, and he's the founder of People's Association of Justice Advocates. Please welcome Shane Harris.
Thank you, Senator Grove. And, I also happen to be a Baptist preacher. So if you all feel a little something in your spirit, don't feel free to speak out. I want to thank Senator Grove and Senator Rubio, as well as Tyson McKay, who reached out to me recently in the past few months. First and foremost, I want to thank you, Senator Grove, for your heart, your courage, and your leadership to bring these measures forth. And this year's bill's co-authors, Senator Rubio and Senator Caballero, also standing up with courage. I'm proud to stand here as a former foster youth of 13 years here in California, after the losses of both of my parents at 8 years old. I'm the president of a national civil rights organization called the People's Association of Justice Advocates, which is a national civil rights organization and policy think tank. And I'm a former friend of someone who died as a human trafficking victim and who attended San Pasqual Academy with me, which is the nation's first residential education facility for foster youth, based out of San Diego County. We commonly identify girls and women as victims of trafficking. However, boys are regularly targeted as well. And there's no secret that our children in particular are at the brunt and the most vulnerable to be targeted. The FBI has ranked San Diego as one of the 13 worst regions in the United States, with up to 8,000 victims per year. In a recent sex trafficking bust or human trafficking operation led by San Diego County District Attorney Summer Stephan and the FBI, a 15-year-old was found within that sting operation. Per FBI statistics, and this is why I'm really here, 60% of trafficking victims are or have been in the foster care system. So how can it not be our state's responsibility, our state leaders' responsibility, to say that we're not going to let the most vulnerable, our children, be taken advantage of, but especially the children that we have oversight over. When I was in the foster care system and I emancipated at 18, and they dropped me off in downtown San Diego with my bag of clothes and an emancipation letter, it said that I was a ward of the state. I was a ward of the state for 13 years. So, what does that mean? A child of the state. Children in our state are being trafficked as we speak. And it is our state's responsibility and our state leaders' responsibility to get SB 14 across the finish line. SB 1414 across the finish line. We got SB 14 across the finish line last year. In closing, I'll say this. Last year, there should not have even been a question about SB 14 and the significance and the importance of that piece of legislation, which went after those who sell our children and our most vulnerable. This year, because I know and got on board in the last swing of things and called the governor and called our Democratic leaders and called others and said, we've got to call Senator Grove and we've got to turn this around. I'm on board this year to make a very clear statement that civil rights, as the only civil rights organization to support this piece of legislation, I am calling on other civil rights organizations to join this movement.
Preach it.
Period. It is a shame that I am the only civil rights activist and leader in the state of California to make a stance on this. It is a shame that many of my colleagues have argued that this kind of legislation rolls the clock back on criminal justice reform. Well, whoever is out there saying that this rolls the clock back on criminal justice reform, I want you to know that you cannot tell time. Because it's time to hold the perpetrators who take advantage of our children accountable. Because it's time to send a thorough message that if you seek to buy a child for sex, that you will pay the highest criminal penalties in this state. Because it's time to send a thorough message that if you seek to take advantage of our most vulnerable, especially our foster children, you will pay the price. It's time to send SB 1414 to the governor's desk and send a thorough message that our most vulnerable children ought to be protected by the state of California. Thank you.
That's why you bring a man of God and an activist to a press conference. Thank you. Our last speaker today is one of my heroes. I have to tell a funny story. He's so intelligent, and he understands the law and code section and all of those things. And I know I'm going off script. My staff's looking at me, but he says all these smart things, and it's like, you know, hey, we're Aaron Brockovich. We're the face of the operation, but you got to relate things to us that we can understand so we can convey it. And he is just the most incredible advocate, available to us at 2 o'clock in the morning when something happens, 6 a.m. He always answers his phone. He might answer his phone and say, hold on just a minute, I'm walking out of court. And he walks out of court to take our question because of the questions that we get and the feedback we get from other members. And he is just our incredible side-by-side leader. He's at our beck and call. And so please welcome Tyson McCoy to the microphone.
Thank you, Senator Grove, and thank you, everyone who spoke. I want to tell you who my heroes are. They are the people here leading the fight. We are still fighting modern-day slavery. We're fighting against the exploitation of children. You have to ask yourself, those who are sexually abused the most, why the law treats them the least. Why is the single rape of one person a felony, but the 1,000 rapes of a 14-year-old a misdemeanor? Why is it okay for a child to be picked up 10 times a night by strangers and raped over and over and over a misdemeanor, while one person does a single rape and that's a serious felony? There's something majorly wrong. We have to ask ourselves as a society, what is wrong with us as a society if we will not protect our little kids? I want to tell you, people look at me as a prosecutor, and they look at me and they think that I just go to court and all I do is want to put people in prison. I will tell you the other side of the story that people don't talk about in the criminal justice system in the state of California. I sit with victims every day. I sit with mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters who cry, who break down and say, Tyson, why don't they care? Why doesn't anyone care about my little girl or my little boy? I hear from kids that have been in the foster system, like Mr. Harris so eloquently stated. He said, nobody cares about me. Nobody cares. I'm on the street every night being sold to 15 men a night, and nobody cares. I'm sorry, but anyone thinks that a kid who is being sold 10 to 15 times a day that's consensual, needs an education, I would be happy to provide it. I have done hundreds of cases. I have seen kids who are 15 and 16 years old who have been raped 3, 4, 5,000 times before they even can be eligible to drive a car. I want you to understand what these kids tell me when they meet with me. They tell me, Tyson, every time I'm in that hotel room and the trafficker sends a buyer to my hotel room, it's life or death for me. When that door opens, Tyson, I have to read that buyer within a few seconds because it may be my life. I have worked with police who have found buyers showing up who they thought were buying kids with rope, with weapons. This is not consensual. When you go home tonight, when you see your kids, your nieces and your nephews, and they're going to cheer practice, or volleyball practice, or math practice, remember, there are thousands of kids in California who will not go to volleyball. They will not go to cheer. They will not go learn how to be better in school. They will learn how to survive. By the time they are 15, 16, 17 years old, They have been raped thousands of times. So we must ask ourselves as a society within California, are we okay with letting the most vulnerable pay the highest price? So I ask you, in the media, I ask you to tell your friends what one survivor told me. We don't have a voice. We don't have a voice. We need people to stand up and be our voice. And so I'm asking you today to be the voice for the kids in this state who live every day in fear of being raped, not so that they can survive or make their own money, but so they can give it to the trafficker behind the door who takes all of it when they're being trafficked. So I ask you to support SB 1414 and send a loud message. We will no longer be a sanctuary state for child sex trafficking. Thank you.
So thank you. Tyson's a little taller than I am. Let's put that back down. So thank you. We'll take questions if you guys have questions. Senator Rubio and I and Tyson or anybody that you have a question for, we'll be glad to answer questions.
Senator Grove, are you anticipating SB 1414 to be as big of a fight as SB 14 was, or do you think there's momentum and people have kind of opened up their eyes a little bit?
So the question was, do we anticipate SB 1414 to be a fight like SB 14 was? Based on the feedback that I've gotten from the committee, we are still one vote short. And so I'm hoping that with what happened this morning, with this press conference and the stories that you've heard, is that that building is listening. And when we go into that committee room, we will have the votes we need to get this bill out.
So, to your question, one of the reasons why my organization, the People's Association of Justice Advocates, is on board with this early and in the early swing of things is because we understand the importance of making the message very clear that this bill, some of the arguments that were made by some civil rights organizations last year, who said that it would roll back the clock on criminal justice reforms, who said that it would put harsher penalties on people. We want to make it very evidently clear, right, that this piece of legislation, SB 1414, is not only a critical step in the right direction, but it actually is the right time for this reform, and it does not roll the clock back on any of the reforms we made. I've worked on criminal justice reforms across the state in the last several years. I've been a part of those efforts. I know that this piece of legislation only holds perpetrators accountable. It does not put harsher penalties on anyone unless they are doing something that they should not be doing. And I think that's really the critical point here, that we want to make the case to some of those other groups that I have seen are opposing this piece of legislation. The argument, in my opinion, is because they see a Republican senator bringing this forth. It's because they feel like, we should not be, putting harsher penalties on people even when they show and demonstrate that they have repeated the same offense over and over and over again. We have to have common sense in this state and bring this back to the middle and bring this back to a common sense space. And that is why civil rights leaders like myself are saying, we will not tolerate this. We've got to urge this committee and the rest of the legislators to support this and to ignore the arguments that are being made by some civil rights leaders and criminal justice reform groups who say that this rolls the clock back. It doesn't.
Thank you so much. One more question.
Thank you. And I'm not trying to limit questions. We have to be in committee right now, so I apologize. One more question if anybody has one. God bless you guys. Thank you for covering this. The people of the state of California wouldn't know about this if you guys weren't doing this, so thank you. Thank you, everybody.